Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to session number 4 at the CDDF annual conference. And we are going to cover in this session lessons learned from acceleration in pediatric oncology programs. My name is Claudia Hay. I'm heading the European Global Regulatory and Science function within Merck Healthcare, KGaA, and I have a long track record with pediatric drug development. I'm also active at the FPR Pediatric Expert Group since many years. And it's my pleasure to chair the session together with Dominic Harris from EMA. And I'm going to introduce Dominic very briefly. So Dominic has a medical degree from the University of Erlangen. He's a pediatric oncologist. And since 2018, he works as a scientific officer at the EMA Pediatric Medicines at the European Medicines Agency, and is fostering pediatric oncology drug development. He is also a nominee in the Accelerate Steering Committee. And I'm now handing over to Dominic for an introductory statement, and he will also move us to the poll questions. Thank you. Stage is yours, Dominic.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. Thank you. And a warm welcome also on my behalf to you all. And a big thank you to CDF and the organizers for really putting this excellent session and panel together. I'm particularly excited because, I think for this session, we really have all stakeholders around the table, not only to discuss looking back the lessons learned, but also hopefully to have good discussions on based on the lessons learned, how to improve and move forward better together. And with that said, maybe we can move to the first word cloud, the first poll we have put forward here to you all as a benchmark, if you wish, but also to serve us for the panel discussion later. To get an idea from you all, from your experience, what do you really consider the biggest hurdle in designing and performing global pediatric clinical trials in oncology? Just one word, what comes to mind when thinking about what's necessary to design and to conduct a global pediatric oncology program. I know it always takes a bit until we see the first words, but that's great. There they are already. So recruitment, indeed, yes. Anything else? What's coming to mind from your experience when designing and conducting a pediatric oncology study globally? Any other sort of hurdles, issues you've come across? Ethics, yes, very, very much so indeed. Exactly. So if you put in the same word, it gets bigger. That's that recruitment again. Yes, very much so. Small populations, always an issue. Communication, small populations, as mentioned. Maybe we give it a couple of more seconds. Any additional thoughts? Any additional sort of words you might have in mind when it comes to hurdles? Communication getting bigger. Yes, I think that's probably limited patient cohorts. Yeah, so a theme sort of emerges there as well. Maybe I think that's really already I would think a good start. Continue, to use the Slido. I think if that's possible, but maybe we can with that stop it here and move to the next one and the next word cloud we have. And for that, I hand over back to Claudia again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. So the second question, and we only have two, is what have you encountered to work best for facilitation of global pediatric drug development? So the other way around. And we are looking forward to have your feedback there as well. Again, it takes a little time, but yeah, we want to address actually the poll results then also in the panel discussion. So we see the communication topic again. Cooperation, thank you. Different standard of care, for sure. Cooperative groups and networks. Thank you. Parent involvement, very crucial. Maybe we give it 1 more minute. And I assume industry and academic collaboration, it's again about collaboration, right? Okay, thank you. And the networks are mentioned there as well. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. And actually, prior to introducing the first speaker, the timing for the session today is really excellent, also in the context, as Dominic already referred to, of the upcoming revision of the pharmaceutical, of the pediatric legislation, where we are going to see more. But you may also have realized that there was a reignition of the Cancer Moonshot Initiative in the US as well, beginning of this month. And with that, I'm going to introduce the first speaker. So we have Heidrun Hildebrand, who will give us an update on the Connect for Children IMI project. Heidrun is part of the Pediatric Development Group at Bayer and is solely dedicated to pediatric development. She is chairing the internal pediatric advisory group within her company. And she's also representing Bayer in several external initiatives. And she is very much co-leading the Connect for Children project, which is an initiative to create a pan-European pediatric clinical trials network. Heidrun, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yep. Good afternoon. Thank you for the chance to present Connect for Children to you this afternoon. C4C is a pan-European pediatric clinical trial network focusing on the pediatric population in general. And while the network is not primarily designed to serve the pediatric oncology population, we are open also, obviously, to support studies in this population in the future. The aim of C4C is to enhance the development of medicines for babies, children, and young people across all therapeutic areas and across whole Europe. So we try to form a pan-European clinical trial network. As already discussed in the session before, there is quite a lot activity going on to enhance and to improve the way clinical trials are done, and there are still a number of challenges to really make the conduct and the planning of clinical studies easier and more efficient. This is not only true for adult populations, this is even more true for the pediatric population inside and outside of the oncological field. Even there has been a lot of development since the pediatric regulation has been implemented more than 10 years ago. There is still a lot to do. So since the inception and implementation of the pediatric regulation, we see an ever increasing number of pediatric clinical studies and a constant increase of young patients to be included into these trials, which poses a specific challenge here. And we see in the same time that more than 40% of all pediatric plans agreed so far have not completed as planned. Either they lagging behind or they not able to find the correct number, the needed number of patients. And based on this, we see an increased competition between studies about scarce resources, let it be investigators, sites, or patients. And that comes together with the multifaceted challenge, specifically also in the pediatric world. As said, we see a lack of sufficient trial-ready infrastructure. We don't have enough clinical trial sites or well-trained investigators to really do the studies. And that is true for all areas of drug development in children. We see hesitation to either use or to accept the use of innovative study and trial designs, which would allow more efficient implementation of such studies. And we fight again a small patient population and competing developments very often in the same type of patients. And we shouldn't forget the high impact all the clinical trials and the study procedures have on the daily life of patient and families. All this taken together were leading us to think about the solution. And one of the ideas we generated roughly 5 years ago was the creation of a pan-European pediatric clinical trial network under the umbrella of the, at that time, IMI2 funding scheme. IMI2 is was one and still is one of the biggest public-private partnerships in Europe, consisting of receiving funding from the European Commission and EFPIA, the Pharmaceutical Trade Organization in Europe. Aim of this big public-private partnership is to enhance and ensure a safe and efficacious quality of health product, reducing trial time in developing them and increasing the quality of such developments. If we now look directly on C4C, what is C4C? C4C is at the moment one of the biggest public-private collaborations in Europe. The C4C consortia consists of more than 40 beneficiaries, consisting of 10 big pharma companies, and more than 30 academic institutions from universities to healthcare institutions to trial centers and local and specialty networks across Europe, coming from all different indications. Why did we choose the use of a public-private partnership here? The pediatric clinical trial infrastructure in Europe is still fragmented and not sufficiently developed. And to improve the situation, a broad multidisciplinary collaboration is required to meet the challenges and also to be transformative and to collectively address the children's needs for better medicines. The impact we hope to have as C4C in the future is to improve the pediatric development plans and study designs, to lead to more efficient implementation and conduct of pediatric clinical trials, and also to improve data quality, better trial feasibility, and faster enrollment. C4C was implemented in 2018, meaning we are now roughly at the half of our project timelines. And at the moment, at this point in time, we are up and running, conducting five test studies here, 5 so-called proof of viability studies. And we have developed so far a network of experts, which allows us to provide expert advice and patient-parent and to guarantee patient-parent involvement in this type of advices going back and having the chance to reach out to more than 300 clinical and methodological experts working directly with C4C. We have created a single point of contact, which allows all sponsors from academia or from industry to contact the network and have with that single access the chance to work with 21 European countries and more than 200 clinical sites and trial centers. We implemented the training academy, and we also working in data standardization and creation of a pediatric data dictionary. In the following slides, I will give you a little bit more on the examples on what is really the impact and what are the areas where we think the network and where we already see that the network after 3 years makes a difference. As said, we have implemented a large group of experts, and we in the process and working actively with sponsors on the improvement and design and the planning of clinical studies. We provide advice to the sponsors, which has then a direct impact on the way studies are conducted and designed. We provide the advice, our advice is accompanied by written reports, and these reports can be and have been already used also in discussions with regulatory authorities, which is often very helpful as it provides also a neutral way of seeing the issue. We have created processes for trial feasibility and study startup and site selection and study startup. Here we have some very efficient ways in doing it with unique approaches to confidentiality and to the more administrative ways of doing this. I will come to this later. We're working with CDDF, one of the clinical data standardization organization in the US, and creating together with them a pediatric data dictionary and a therapeutic area guide, which would be the first one in the area combining all the standardization processes for clinical data in children, meaning really supporting data sharing and interoperability. As said, we're doing educational efforts, and we have affiliated to us a patient and public involvement team, which really ensures that all our processes not only include children and young people, but they're really designed for their needs. If we look a little bit on more detail on some of the services which are really high impact, I would like to highlight here our advice group, the expert group. We called it strategic feasibility advice because the idea is that is really input which comes well before we really start the study, so more on a strategic level. We have at the moment more than 25 expert groups with over 300 registered experts, including not only different therapeutic specialties, but also ethics advisors, trial methodologists, health technical assessment experts, and also some translational ideas like pharmacometrics and pharmaconomics, which is really helpful for our parts. And we have one activity within this advice working stream, which I think you all may be familiar to as you come from the oncology field. We have started to also design and create and implement something like multi-stakeholder meetings. Here, we're very grateful for the support of Gilles Vassal and his group at CIOP and the Accelerate colleagues, because we really try to transfer the successful approach of the Accelerate strategy meetings also to the non-oncology world, and to help to really design better strategies for some of the high unmet need areas, or for very crowded areas where we see a lot of development and only small patient numbers. Here again, that is a little bit of the experience. Over the last 1.5 years, we had 29 requests, and we have conducted this request according to what we have in all different areas. You can see how many different areas we have here. And that is a very successful scheme we see, which really also has an impact on the way these studies are designed. And that is one example here for the first multi-stakeholder meeting we developed. As said, the idea behind this very similar to the Accelerate strategy forums. And we have now first experience in going on for a second one in atopic dermatitis early March. If we look now at the cornerstone of the network, really the countries involved and the network for conducting studies, we currently have 19 so-called national hubs serving 21 countries across Europe, providing access to roughly 250 clinical trial sites in these countries. We are currently in discussion with 2 further countries for the inclusion of national networks. If we look behind the pure C4C infrastructure of sites and networks, we are also in close cooperation with 8 European multinational specialty networks, and with 3 global research networks in the US, Canada, and Japan, which allows global interoperability of the future network. I said we have some examples and tried to implement processes which allow us faster study startup and more efficient way of working. I have brought here one example of this, which really surprised ourselves also. We have created a very specific process for confidentiality agreements, which allows us now within the network, or which allows a sponsor with a single signature on the sponsor side to cast confidentiality agreements in up to 21 countries and more than 200 sites within very few days and within some weeks, so to say. And this was really amazing. We have tested this now for a number and a range of studies, and we see that with the short timelines we need for the CDA cascade, we were able to identify within 20 working days roughly 100 to 160 sites for different studies here, for different sponsors and different studies, allowing then going in the next step of protocol-specific feasibility and selecting sites here within 2 weeks. This was really in this. So in total, we had here 4 to 6 weeks to really come up with a solid base for clinical sites, which is quite ensuring. What we learned from the sponsors and what was very ensuring that even for large sponsors, C4C was able to offer sites which were not known to the sponsors, to help sponsors to go into countries they haven't used before, especially in the eastern part of Europe. For example, we have sites in Estonia or in the Czech Republic and Poland, and that was very ensuring here that the network works. I mentioned before, we have a group working on data harmonization and standardization. We have internally developed a cross-cutting pediatric data dictionary, allowing unicoding of data in pediatric clinical trials, which is the prerequisite for data sharing and interoperability later on. And we're really proud that the CDDF took on this pediatric data dictionary and is now working with us in a respective therapeutic area guide for children. And with this, we hope we see a long-term effect on what we do and the outcome. We have a very we have a training and education platform and C4C Academy in place, which currently already trains all the clinical trial sites and the investigators, both on general questions related to clinical trials, study conduct, quality improvement, but is also able to deliver study-specific training courses and more broader general courses. We currently have a master course in pediatric drug development ongoing with more than 50 participants across the board from academia and from industry. So the expected long-term impact of C4C is really to make the access to new experimental therapies for children in well-designed clinical trials possible also in all parts of Europe, to improve the trial readiness by training and providing needed support for research personnel and the respective clinical trial sites, to improve the efficiency both in execution and in setup of clinical trials, specifically pediatric clinical trials, to improve data quality, and also to enhance the role of clinicians and parent advocates in planning and designing the studies. We see there is a high interest of all type of sponsors in getting this advice and specifically also talking to people which are closer to the practical approach of the studies and learning new voices here. And really one of the larger aims here is really to broaden the access of academic medical centers and clinical faculty across Europe to new experimental therapies, because we have seen and learned that at the moment the majority of pediatric clinical studies is done in a very limited number of countries in Europe. So enabling whole Europe to participate in these studies would already really helping the feasibility of this and speeding up the process. With this, I would like to thank you for listening to me and learning some and being interested in Connect for Children. Connect for Children, as said, is in the moment still under IMI funding. That means we have limited possibilities to work with the general public, but nevertheless, if you're interested, please see our contact points on this website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heidrun. And we will definitely come back to a few of the topics you flagged, like the fragmented infrastructure, but also the challenges you referred to in the panel discussion later. I just want to motivate all participants to put your questions into the Q&A section. We will address all questions together during the panel discussion. And now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Peter Adamson from Sanofi, US. So Peter is the Global Development Therapeutic Area Head, Oncology and Pediatric Innovation at Sanofi. He leads a global cancer drug development for Sanofi, and he is an emeritus professor of pediatrics and pharmacology at the Perelman School of Medicine and board certified in pediatric hematology, oncology, and clinical pharmacology. And he also was appointed by President Obama to the National Cancer Advisory Board and served as a panel member for Biden's National Cancer Moonshot Initiative. So, but Peter will also provide the academic perspective. So we are combining academic and industry perspective. Thank you, Peter.
It's a pleasure to be at the CDDF conference, and I want to thank the organizers for this kind invitation. I'm going to be speaking briefly about some lessons learned from Acceleration in Pediatric Oncology program, both from an academic perspective, because I spent most of my career in academia, as well as from an industry perspective. As far as disclosure, I am currently an employee and have an investment interest in Sanofi. I do want to point out that certain components of this lecture were originally presented at the Accelerate conference in 2017, but are still highly relevant today. So to set the stage, I think it's important to put the problem of childhood cancer into certain context. Using data from the US, but one can certainly apply this to high-income countries, we know the number of childhood cancers pale in comparison to the number of adults with cancers, but that doesn't really tell the story. Cancer remains the leading cause of death from disease in children. So despite all our progress, where almost 80% of children are long-term survivors, it still remains the leading cause of death from disease. In the US, 1 in every 330 Americans develops cancer before the age of 30. And today, 1 in 750 20-year-olds alive in the US is a survivor of childhood cancer. Quite importantly, however, more than half of children surviving childhood cancer have serious lifelong consequences of treatment. So when one asks me, why do we need new drugs for children with cancer? I think there are three pillars to that. We have to improve the cure rates. We have to diminish acute toxicity, which is substantial with current therapy, and minimize the risk for late effects. So let me talk about pediatric drug development, and it has truly become an interplay between industry partners, regulatory agents, and academic groups. So academic networks, both in the US, Europe, and other parts of the world, have a central role in the conduct of clinical trials, and certainly for any phase 3 trial and many phase 2 or phase 1 trials, academia is central to the conduct of this trial. Overlying this entire paradigm is the input of patient, parents, and advocates. So there have been a number of regulatory initiatives, and I think Dominic or Greg Riemann will be speaking about these later, but let me touch upon them very briefly. They began in the US, and then they followed in Europe, and there's been some back and forth in these initiatives. The first one was the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children's Act, BPCA, and this was a voluntary incentive, and it allowed for a 6-month period of extension exclusivity, and clearly has had an impact in pediatric diseases. The Pediatric Research Equity Act, which was a requirement, has had a more limited impact because historically, and I'll get back to this, most oncology drugs received waivers because the diseases where which drugs were indicated, breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, simply didn't occur in children. But this has most recently been followed by the RACE Act, Research to Accelerate Cures and Equity for Children. It is now fully enacted. It had about a 2-year rollout period. And in this case, it's not based on disease, but it's based on relevance of drug targets to childhood cancer. And it truly will minimize the opportunity for waivers. A very parallel series of initiatives has been enacted by the EMA called Pediatric Investigation Plans, and I'm confident you'll learn more about that as the afternoon goes on. What have these initiatives done? Well, without question, they've catalyzed discussion between stakeholders, especially academic childhood cancer networks and industry partners. Now, the early pediatric regulatory initiatives had a relatively limited impact for children with cancer. That is evolving, and the impact is becoming greater. And the most recent act in the US, the RACE impact, was only fully implemented last year. And so its full impact, I think, remains to be determined. But I want to focus on a specific issue. There was an interesting paper by my colleagues, Neil Schulman and Stephen Du Bois, looking at the timing of first-in-childhood trials of FDA-approved cancer drugs. And timing, I think, is central to discovery and advancing therapies. And what they found was that the time between the start date of the first-in-human clinical trial, generally the first-in-adult trial, and the first trial eligible to enroll pediatric patients was a median of 6.5 years. So by definition, children in essence are lagging behind scientific advances by a median of 6.5 years. And there are a number of reasons for this that I'm going to discuss, but I think we can all agree that this is an unacceptable situation given the pace of discovery, the pace of science, the pace of drug development, that children should lag in taking part of those advances by 6.5 years. So the example I'm going to give you is from the most common childhood cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And what you see is that acute lymphoblastic leukemia is truly a disease of children and adolescents. In fact, children and adolescents are about equal in number to older adults. So whereas most childhood cancers pale in comparison as far as incidence to adult counterparts, for ALL, that is not the case. In this case, children are the predominant population that are impacted. So here's a story I shared many years ago about a novel drug for patients with ALL. And this drug was, the data from the first in human trial was presented in adults in 2011. So efficacy data, showing significant efficacy data of this new drug, presented in 2011. Ultimately, the drug was approved for adults with relapsed cancer in 2017. And as Steve's paper highlighted, the first child enrolled was the same year. So in this case, it was more than 6 years between starting the adult trial, let alone presenting it in 2011, and starting pediatric development. And for all diseases where the numbers were no different, ALL is that disease. So how did we arrive at a point where a new drug reached regulatory approval for adults with ALL and pediatric trials were just starting? Well, I come back to this paradigm because it's an interplay between industry, regulatory agencies, and academia. And I think it's best to look at this example that I believe can extend to many examples as a system failure. So let me spend a few minutes discussing why I think the system failed, because there was not just one problem here. And it wasn't that people weren't doing their jobs, but the system, in my view, did not work. It failed. So I'll start with industry. And now I'm in this industry for the past 2 years, so I'm pointing my finger at myself. Now, in general, industry does not want to invest significant resources in pediatric development until there's a reasonable likelihood of regulatory approval for an adult indication. And this, unfortunately, has not been fully impacted by the incentives and the requirements. And realistically speaking, in many circumstances, industry seeks to minimize its financial investment for pediatric development. The reason for that is the business models are extremely difficult. All of childhood cancer are a constellation of rare and ultra-rare diseases. And to create a business model there has indeed been a challenge for industry. There have been some exceptions that I think can pave the way. But nonetheless, despite the advances we've made, despite the regulatory changes, there is not a true incentive to starting early. What about academia? Well, that's where I spent most of my career. I would ask, should there be a more robust push to get into the clinic faster? Because academia deals with outside funding agencies, often government agencies, it deals with industry partners, it deals with philanthropic partners. It's a complex mix of funding, and getting into the clinic can sometimes be met with unexpected hurdles. Should we start with simpler trial designs? Because so few studies can be conducted in certain populations, there is often an understandable push to learn as much as possible. That learning can create complexities. And there are times where perhaps we should be most focused on successful development of a drug, recognizing that we might not in real time be able to answer every question that's posed. And ultimately, can the efficiency of study development be improved? I think across the industry, across academia, the answer to that is going to be yes. Implementing solutions, however, is not trivial. but we need to improve the efficiency in which we develop drugs. And then I come to regulatory agencies. And here I would say the question is, are requirements too granular or too restrictive? The regulatory agencies are bound to meet certain requirements. The output of those sometimes can be requests that indeed are granular or restrictive. And as an example, I would raise a question, should pediatric oncology have a greater regulatory burden than medical oncology? And unfortunately, in certain circumstances, that is what has evolved. In fact, for example, in this case for childhood ALL, there was a requirement to define an optimal biologic dose versus the hurdle for medical oncologists, adults with cancer, a safe and effective dose. Don't get me wrong, that is not a misplaced goal. Understanding the optimal biologic dose is important. But should that be a hurdle where the burden is put almost exclusively on children? So I think there's room for improvement here as we try to align the true goal, finding a safe and effective drug, recognizing that additional learnings will follow. But there has indeed been progress. From a regulatory incentive and requirement, it has truly been a major catalyst throughout industry to build pediatric capabilities. I've been doing this for a long time. I began pediatric cancer drug development more than 30 years ago. And at that time, to even find someone in industry who was willing to discuss drug development was a major hurdle. There is no question that the regulations and incentives have changed the landscape. And as I hope you'll hear later from Greg, race implementation, which has taken disease diagnosis off the radar screen and replaced it with the relevance of the target, I think is going to further drive improvements in capabilities with industry. Both Europe and the US are working to understand what each other is doing. They have regular cluster meetings between the FDA and EMA. And I think this ultimately is leading to better informed development plans. That's not to say that the two are going to be the same, and that can prove a challenge for industry. But there is frequent and regular communication, and I'm hopeful that will allow for better alignment of requirements. I think I've been doing this long enough to say that when we look at pediatric investigation plans at PIPs, when we look at pediatric plans from the FDA, my sense is they're improving over time. Regulatory agencies are learning from their past moves to how do we make it better? And to me, that gives us hope that they can continue to improve. And ultimately, I would say childhood cancer drug development is on the radar screen of virtually all big pharma and many biotechs. And being on that radar screen is essential to our advances. I want to now talk a little bit about a platform that originated with colleagues in Europe, but has now become international. And that is a platform that is rightfully named the Accelerate platform. So Accelerate is an international multi-stakeholder organization that's focused on improving and accelerating new drug development for children and patients with cancer. And it is a patient-centric organization. This is an organization that, in a remarkable way, has brought together not only industry partners, but has brought in academic experts, academic networks. It has brought in funding agencies, and equally, if not more important, it has brought in patient and family advocacy groups to begin to address this challenge at a global scale. And I'm going to return to why a global scale turns out to be necessary. But if you look at how it's grown, and it started in 2015, participation is now increasing. Both US and Canada, and now bringing on Mexico. Almost all of Europe has now expanded, and we're looking as well, of course, at Australia and Japan. This is continuing to grow. And this platform, I think, probably like no other, has all the people in the room when we discuss the problems. It's just not a subset. It's everyone who has a hand in pediatric drug development is at the table. They have a voice and solutions can be found. One function of the Accelerate platform is strategy forums. And so over time, strategy forums have rolled out looking at specific challenges to us. We know the story of anaplastic lymphoma kinase, ALK inhibition, which has remarkable activity, not only for patients with anaplastic lymphomas, but also for a subset of children with neuroblastoma. And you can move down this list and you can understand why there were important questions, because for children, these were going to be ultra rare populations, and many companies had drugs in development. Clearly, we were not going to be in a position to study all the drugs being developed. We needed a prioritization. Industry needed direction. Regulatory agencies needed to hear from us. This evolved in studies for epigenetic modifiers, which may turn out to be an essential component of future treatment for pediatric cancers. And you can see how it has evolved, including cellular therapies, as well as tyrosine kinase inhibitors. For this upcoming year, we've already defined that RAF and MEK inhibitors will be a topic. But these forums bring together the stakeholders, industry that is focused on developing drugs, regulatory agencies, academic networks, patients and families. So hats off to my colleagues in Europe. They have brought together an international community to help with this problem. With all that said, there are still challenges and we have not found solutions. So there has been progress, but right now I would say there's little evidence that we're truly shortening the timeline between first in human studies and first in children studies. We need to do that. 6.5 years delay is not acceptable, and we don't truly have a solution for that. But the other thing to keep in mind, because we're dealing with rare and ultra rare diseases, is that a maximum in general of 2 phase 3 trials in any pediatric cancer, and sometimes there can only be 1 phase 3 trial, can be conducted globally every 4 to 6 years. We simply cannot conduct multiple phase 3 trials at the same era for children with cancer. So prioritization should be considered by all stakeholders to allow more rapid development of high priority drugs. Not all drugs are created equal. We need to prioritize, we need to decide as a global community which are moving forward. And in my view, the time we spend discussing phase 3 trial design prior to any pediatric clinical data being available are both resource draining and counterproductive. And I've seen some movement away from that. We're not an industry looking to get out of a phase 3 trial, but we have to recognize that the community has to prioritize what's the most important phase 3 question we can ask today. And we have to align that desire and that goal with our requirements. So moving forward, I think that clinical development of high priority new agents can be accelerated. Regulatory incentives and requirements both could and should be better aligned to meet the goal of expeditiously moving the high priority new agents into pediatric clinical development. So I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to the additional presentations and our discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And definitely we will address the prioritization aspect that you mentioned several times also during the panel discussion. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Dominic again. He's not only my co-chair, but also a speaker in our session. And Dominic will provide the European perspective on collaborations to accelerate global oncology drug development. And as we introduced you already shortly, I will hand over to you now for your presentation. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you very much to the organizers and for the very nice introduction and for giving me the opportunity really today to present the EMA's perspective of lessons learned from accelerating in pediatric oncology drug development. This is my usual disclaimer. I would like to start with a short reflection on the main challenges in pediatric drug development in general, I would think, and challenges I believe very well known to all of us, really to sort of illustrate the need for coordination and collaboration, starting from the sort of conceptual question in pursuing development of a novel treatment. Where is the unmet medical need, for example? What is the subsequent best target population? And when, within the overall context of available evidence, do we start initiating a study in pediatric patients, really leading to the content of a trial design? What's the deciding on, is there a standard of care? What's the standard of care? If there are many, what's the best one to use? In what would we assume and consider to be the best study design for the question we want to answer? And then really finally, how to operationalize such development efforts within the context of all the different regulations there are. Really, again, looking at it and seeing all the challenges there are. Hopefully, all appreciating that we need to work together, and I mean all stakeholders involved in pediatric oncology drug development. From a regulatory perspective, I would think that we as regulators cannot and don't even want to decide on certain elements in isolation. Elements I have alluded to just now. Appreciating the importance of cooperation and collaboration globally across all stakeholders involved, I would now like to sort of highlight two examples which have been built to address the need for collaboration and provide a clear value, I think, to the overall objective of acceleration. And that is first, multi-stakeholder interactions within the pediatric oncology strategy forums, and second, the international regulatory coordination. Two sort of themes where I believe we have made some progress and are able to address some of the key challenges I've just mentioned. Strategy forums are, as we have heard, and you're aware, meetings organized by Accelerate, a multi-stakeholder platform, together with EMA and FDA participation, really with the objective to exchange views and around unmet medical needs, either on a disease type or a class of products, to work together towards accelerating drug development based on science in the interest of patients with cancer. This is a slide giving you an overview of the past and the future strategy forums. And thanks here to Andy Pearson, who provided me with this slide, really showing the sort of evolution of the strategy forums over the past years. The next one will be on MAP kinase inhibitors, end of May. The last one has been on MTKIs in sarcoma. Outcomes of all the forums are publications, but also, and I think that's much more important, concrete deliverables catalyzed through the discussions at the forums itself. And these are follow-up activities like development of platform trials in pediatric AML or BNHL, or follow-up meetings between academia and industry partners, really to further prioritize product developments across different companies. So acknowledging that regulated decision-making cannot and should not take place in isolation, we need to build on the scheme of shared responsibility, and doing this through multi-stakeholder engagement, such as the strategy forums, has, I think, really sort of proven to address some of the development challenges I mentioned at the beginning, and can really sort of support regulatory decision making. And here are sort of some of the experiences in that regard, that it is possible, showing that it is possible and necessary for academia and industry to collaborate early and to discuss priorities based on unmet medical needs, and that this is a sort of continuous exercise beyond the forum and beyond sort of only one discussion meeting, as a sort of a living prioritization exercise, something which has been implemented not only within the platform trials I've mentioned, but also was an outcome, for example, of the last strategy forum. And this sort of really ultimately leading to focused and sequential development efforts in that regard. And here, you know, again, concluding that by working together as part of or through multi-stakeholder engagements, as described in the pediatric oncology strategy forums organized by Accelerate, such outcomes and outcome conclusions can really support our decision making from a regulatory perspective. Coming to the next and the second point of international regulatory coordination, why is this important? I think we all recognize that pediatric cancer drug development is a global endeavor, and that sponsors need to satisfy different requirements, regulatory requirements globally. And here, the implementation of the RACE Act, where I believe Dr. Riemann will give an update on later, has really sort of underpinned again the need for further strengthening of international collaboration in that regard. To do so, we use the pediatric cluster calls, a very well-established and efficient platform, meeting monthly, as you know, with participants from EMA, FDA, TGA in Australia, PMDA in Japan, and Health Canada, really to discuss products, but also general topics, you know, such as methodological concepts, for example, and to make most use most use of this opportunity for oncology products. End of 2020. We called for transparency and simultaneous PIP and PSP submissions to EMA and FDA, because really only, you know, by knowing what the plans are, what the regulatory plans are to fulfill the requirements of the other respective agency, allows us to identify a product for discussion at the cluster call. Otherwise, it is just second guessing. As a next step, in March last year, we published a generic common commentary for pediatric oncology, because, you know, for developers and sponsors, knowing upfront when developing your pediatric investigation plan or your PSP, you know, knowing upfront what the key issues are, we as regulators commonly ask, that allows you to sort of put these issues already in your initial application, and allows and facilitates early focus discussions and coordination then of global development plans between the regulators here. And the differences in regulation, I think that's an important part here, are not considered a hurdle and can be overcome. In addition, EMA participates as observers to FDA type F meetings, and vice versa. FDA, under the same confidentiality agreement under which the cluster calls take place, FDA is able to participate as observers to PIP clarification TCs, and both has happened last year. So to conclude, despite the different regulatory processes and timelines there is an opportunity for early coordinated discussions between agencies using the cluster calls, and that can really assure timely initiation of early phase studies and a coordinated approach to later phase developments. Something we have seen being taken up really very positively last year. Before handing over to the next speaker, to finally summarize from our perspective the lessons learned on what is key to overcome the challenges for accelerating or to better accelerate global pediatric oncology programs. Early academia and multi-company engagement followed by early involvement of regulators is an important learning. Multi-stakeholder discussions should be used and something really taken up because we know and we have seen that this can support identification of unmet medical needs and priorities, subsequently supporting regulated decision making. Lastly, transparency by industry to regulators on what their pediatric plans are beyond Europe is really key and important for us to learn, and subsequent, simultaneous submissions of mandated development plans to Europe and the US really allow early and coordinated discussions between agencies at the monthly cluster calls, and therewith really facilitate concretely coordinated discussions and a coordinated approach towards global development efforts. And with that, thank you very much also to my colleagues from the EMA, but also the FDA, and I'm happy to take any questions later. Thank you. Before moving to the next presentation from Annette Becker, I would just like to remind you again, if you have any questions, put them forward, and we will address them at the upcoming panel discussion. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you Annette Becker, President of the Children's Tumor Foundation. And she will give us an introduction or a reflection on how nonprofit research foundations can support acceleration. And with her really leadership experience in both academic and pharma and biotech research enterprises in Europe and the US, I think she's very well placed to do that. And looking very much forward to her presentation. Annette, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present the business model of the Children's Tumor Foundation. It's really about how research foundations can be change makers in the R&D ecosystem. First of all, I would tell you a little bit about the focus of our disease of our foundation. We're focusing on a disorder called neurofibromatosis, which is in just one slide, a family of 3 genetic disorders, NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis, with an incidence anywhere from 1 over 3,000 to 1 over 60,000. All 3 disorders have in common that they cause tumors to grow on the nerves that are led by tumor suppressor gene pathways. They lead to significant morbidity, and all 3 are unfortunately progressive disorders. And just to give you an idea of what I mean when I speak about progressive disorders, for NF1, it's in fact a lifelong disorder. The children are typically diagnosed at birth, show café au lait spots, and then over their lifetime, and I'm not going to go into all the different manifestations of NF, but as you can see, it's a very complex disorder, and at every life point or at every point in people's life, they are at risk for different manifestations. The same situation for NF2, where patients typically are diagnosed later. There are some patients that are diagnosed early in life, but the NF2, the hallmark tumor that is developed is vestibular schwannoma, which leads to deafness. And then there is a number of other tumors, meningioma, epithelioma, but also neuropathic pain, etc. So again, a progressive disorder, a complex progressive disorder. For schwannomatosis, the situation is even more unknown, honestly. The people are typically diagnosed in adulthood. They are diagnosed they have tumors on their nerves. In the beginning, the surgeries will in fact help relieve the pain, but then in fact, unfortunately, the surgeries don't help anymore and people really live with excruciating pain. So for schwannomatosis, we really should be looking at pain medications. To give you a quick idea of that, this is about real people, right? I put the names on them because those are people that we deal with on a daily basis. Dan, Aiden, Julie, Ken is a lawyer in New York City. Aiden and Dan work at the foundation, but all these people are real people. And some of them are visibly affected by neurofibromatosis and others are not. NF2 is, I call those suffer in silence. They are people that look perfect on the outside, but have all kinds of tumors on the inside. McKinnon Galloway is 27-year-old. She's a public relation manager, but as you can see, her brain MRI shows a very different picture of that perfectly looking girl. She has many tumors inside and she is at risk of losing her hearing. Bill Ryder, same situation, over 60 years old. He's volunteering for the Red Cross, but what is really messing up his life, honestly, is the excruciating pain that he is dealing with. So why am I telling you all this? And what is in fact the investment philosophy of the Children's Tumor Foundation? I'm telling you about the patients because those are at the center of everything we're doing. But what we are really doing as a foundation are three things. One, we invest in research, and I will show you a few case studies in the beginning. Either competitive grants, let the best one win, or collaborative grants, which are called synodos, where it's really bring the winning team together to solve big complex problems. Then we have in fact identified that publications is not good enough, and we have built an R&D enabling platform everywhere from registries to endpoints to target scans to even a contract research organization now for drug testing, all that to make sure that these magnificent discoveries lead to better treatments for patients. And then the third thing we do is really building communities of scientists, clinicians, patients, pharma executives, even regulators. And then we have a big patient engagement program that really shows where our patients are the most useful for themselves and for the R&D process. They help review clinics. They review even grants now for the research from the research side. They go to science patient ad boards in pharmaceutical companies to explain the company what it means to live with NF, and they do the same thing at the FDA and the EMA to really show what it means to live with a condition like neurofibromatosis. I thought to give you a few examples to show that this actually is real. So we have, and I'm not going to ask you to read this whole slide, but what is important is we put this winning team together for neurofibromatosis. We did it for many other conditions as well, but just the example for NF2, we invested about $3 million over 3 years to build a fully comprehensive preclinical pipeline that has led to drugs. And now we're co-funding with Takeda, the very first platform trial for neurofibromatosis, which is looking at multiple tumors with multiple drug applications. And there is 6 participating sites across the United States. We are doing the same platform trial development now in Europe in an exercise called EU-PRO. It's an IMI grant. The next slide, equally busy, and I'm sorry about that, is to show that the approval of Koselugo, which is the very first drug for NF1, for plexiform neurofibromas, has been a collaboration between multiple funders. And as you can see, the light green is the Children's Tumor Foundation. So across this entire, what we call parcours, this whole path of getting this MEC discovery all the way to an approved drug has been a collaboration between multiple funders. And as you can see, CDDF was a real part of this whole path. just to show you that this is a real drug. It has gotten people out of their wheelchairs, literally, because the tumor are really shrinking because of the MEK inhibition. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of other examples. Our advocacy funds, our advocacy efforts have led to NF funding from the CDMRP, which is the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. We go on the Hill twice a year to really advocate for, it's about between $15 and $20 million every year for global NF research. We have participated in multiple public consultations in Europe and for the European Parliament, regards to beating cancer plan, with regards to the rare disease, and the data, the health data initiative. We have honestly advocated to include NF in one of the calls as a prototype for rare disease in the IMI2. And now we are work package leaders for the NF work package within an IMI grant called EU Pearl, and we are an IMI associated partner. And over the timeline of the grant, we are in kind investing about €1 million. We have our partnership with Pfizer Cures, and that has literally led to the spin out of mirdametinib in a company called SpringWorks, which is now a highly successful company in the United States, developing drugs for plexiform neurofibroma. Our investment in training, which is another gap that we had identified, is that NF is still a rare disorder, and there's very few clinicians that actually know how to deal with those patients. So we have done a couple of things, such as we're organizing now masterclasses given by NF experts in Europe, and the program is called Infer, and all the recordings are on YouTube in 6 languages. We're organizing virtual case conferences to really discuss between NF experts complex situations with NF patients. And this year, or 2021, we have organized the very first NF training class also in South America in both English and Spanish. We're investing in dissemination because we think that it's really important that if new discoveries are made, and especially when it comes to endpoints for clinical trial, this needs to be public. So we are paying for the open publication of mission critical publications. And we are organizing every year the world's largest NF conference. And we have been doing that since 1988. We're also investing, and that is not on this slide, a NF summit, which is more patient facing. And then we are really highly investing in open science. We launched the very first ever NF data portal that we started in 2014. And now this is a co-funding between both the NIH, NTAP, which is another NF funder, NFRI, another NF funder, and the NCDMRP, where everybody is kind of incentivized or invited or a little bit forced sometimes to share their even unpublished data in this data portal. And that has led to the creation of a data movement that has resulted in already a number of NF hackathons that we have held since 2019. I want to close by saying that we also offer a lot of resources for the NF patients, and that is really driven by the patients. So it's in fact the patients that say, we would like to know where to find a doctor. We would like to get educational materials. We would like to get school materials for the teachers of our children. We would like to make sure that NF becomes a known condition. So based on, in fact, the input and the really strong collaboration between the foundation and our patient community, we have built a number of resources for the patients, honestly, with the patients. So we have in the US, we exist for about 40 years, and we've also launched our CTF Europe operations since 2018 with that identical same mission of working together and making sure that we end NF together. And with that, I really would like to thank you for your attention. And if you would like to get in touch with me, please reach out. We're always there, and join our movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annette. And any questions, please, again, put it in the Q&A and we'll get to it later during the panel discussion. It's now my great pleasure for the last presentation to introduce you, Dr. Greg Riemann, Associate Director for Pediatric Oncology in the FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence and Associate Director for Pediatrics in the Office of Oncological Diseases at CDER, a well-known and respected leader in his field. And he will now present the FDA experience with accelerated programs, followed on by some lessons learned from a recent AAADV meeting. Before giving you the floor, Greg, just to mention that unfortunately Dr. Riemann has to leave earlier during the panel discussion. So we will address any questions to him first. So feel free to put your questions forward again into the Q&A, and we'll address these questions at the beginning of the panel session. Thanks again, and looking much forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gregory Riemann from the Oncology Center of Excellence at the FDA. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the early experience of the Race for Children Act and its impact on early initiation of pediatric investigations. Just my standard disclaimer, what I'm presenting here is essentially my opinion and not necessarily reflect the official position of the Food and Drug Administration. As we all know, pediatric oncology drug development is challenged. Several years ago, the pediatric subcommittee of the Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee developed a consensus statement that drug development for children should generally be coordinated with oncology drug development for adults as part of an overall drug development plan. And as you can all imagine, except in very rare circumstances, that has rarely been the situation. Drug development for children and adolescents in cancer widely leverages adult drug discovery and development, limited opportunities for extrapolation, and very little preclinical testing in pediatric tumor models. There's been extensive delays in initial pediatric evaluation, and this has truly been the greatest challenge. And the impact of existing legislative initiatives in the US, the Pediatric Research Equity Act and the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, which support drug development, have really been markedly less obvious in oncology than in other clinical areas. The whole cancer drug development paradigm in general has changed in that genomic and proteomic profiling of human cancers has resulted in identification of highly specific targeted agents. Approvals have been based on trial results of biomarker-enriched patient populations with large treatment effects demonstrated in studies, which have given rise really to the concept of precision cancer medicine, which has been transformative in a number of adult diseases and is translated now into tissue or histology agnostic development, which I think can provide expanded opportunities for childhood cancer. So the Race for Children Act was incorporated as part of the FDA Reauthorization Act in August of 2017. It went into full effect in August of 2020, and it essentially amends the Pediatric Research Equity Act and requires evaluation of new targeted drugs and biologics intended for treatment of adult cancers, but directed at a target that's substantially relevant to the growth or progression of a pediatric cancer to be investigated when the subject of an initial new drug application. This statute describes molecularly targeted pediatric cancer investigations. These are essentially phase 1b studies with data on dosing, signal of activity, and tolerability. And these agreed initial pediatric study plans must accompany or precede the submission of an application for a new drug to the FDA. And importantly, the amendment eliminates the orphan exemption for pediatric development. There was a requirement for the FDI to work with the NCI and develop a list of relevant and non-relevant molecular targets. These lists are posted on the FDA website at the address demonstrated here. We've been working with the NCI and the Children's Cancer Data Initiative and the Molecular Targets Platform to develop a computable format for this based on specific gene identifiers, and working with internal and external constituents to assure a successful implementation. We were also required to publish a guidance, and the final guidance was published last year, and the address is listed here. There was also a requirement for early advice meetings, which were to focus on clarifying initial pediatric study plan requirements. These are to be held within 30 days of request, so like type A meetings. Briefing documents with questions are required. We have an internal meeting with the respective review division, provide written responses, and we've had quite a number of these since the program started several years ago. We've actually had 28 type F or early advice meetings for 28 distinct new active ingredients or specific new drugs. 18 for solid tumor indications and 10 for adult hematologic indications, as demonstrated here. Just to provide some idea of the number of agreed IPSPs since the law went into full effect in August of 2020 through the most recent period, the end of January of this year. There have been agreed IPSPs reviewed by our internal review committee for 26 new molecular entities. These are original applications, so not any supplemental applications. 8 of these products were directed at relevant molecular targets. Non-relevant molecular targets, and led to full waivers automatically. And 18 to relevant molecular targets. And in 12 situations, there were pediatric studies that were committed to. A number of deferrals for primarily given that the applications for the adult indication were ready to be submitted. And there was an expectation that study results of the pediatric investigations would lag considerably. A number of partial waivers for particular or specific age groups, generally newborns or children less than a year of age, and a number of full waivers, and these were primarily for investigations of same-in-class agents, notably a significant number of PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors. But just to demonstrate the impact, this slide just shows the number of approved new cancer drugs for the periods 2018 through the last calendar year. And you can see there is some mild variation in the number of new agents, new drugs that are approved by the agency, but it's a relatively stable figure. A significant number of these products are targeted agents where the molecular target to which the product is directed does appear to have relevance, or there's certainly literature data to support that the target is relevant for one or more pediatric cancers. And that is represented by the red bar. And the green bar demonstrates that there are commitments to, or there are already studies, pediatric studies in progress for those drugs that are directed at relevant molecular targets. So you can see that there has been a significant increase in the past year, with 83% of those new molecular entities directed at relevant molecular targets for which there is a commitment that will be part of a post-marketing agreement or post-marketing requirement for a pediatric investigation. Or in some of these cases, pediatric studies are already in progress. So I believe that there's a promising trend for commitment to early pediatric studies, which was the primary intent of this piece of legislation. Definitive pediatric development will remain voluntary and will be hopefully accomplished primarily through the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act. The impact of the Race for Children Act does require some regulatory flexibility on the part of the agency with innovation and study design, looking at using platform trials, synthetic controls, Bayesian adaptive designs, and relaxing type 1 errors for randomized clinical trials given the sample size constraints that are often seen, almost always seen, with pediatric clinical trials. And obviously, global collaboration and international clinical trials and regulatory alignment are critical. Speaking of global alignment and the need for international trials, as part of the recent AAADB workshop held in September of this past year, there was a session on developing a global pediatric neuro-oncology network. This was a multi-stakeholder session with investigators, patient advocates, regulators, and individuals from industry. It's pertinent that the focus was on neuro-oncology as brain tumors now cause the majority of childhood cancer deaths. So developing new drugs for brain tumors is clearly a way to address a critical unmet clinical need. There are a number of established networks in the United States and the EU, the Children's Oncology Group, the Pediatric Brain Tumor Consortium, SIOP Europe, the Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium, and a number of others. And we also heard of the progress of developing regional networks in India, one focused at the Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai, and another at the Apollo Hospital in Chennai. And there was clearly industry interest and a commitment to try and facilitate this program. So some of the challenges were really pretty straightforward, really defining the scope and the breadth of outreach, clarification of objectives and mission of an international or global clinical trial network to improve standard of care, to focus on the development and perhaps registration or approval, marketing authorization of new cancer therapies. Obviously, there were challenges because of the diverse access to core diagnostic and therapeutic capabilities as far as neurosurgical procedures, pathology, genomic sequencing, and radiation therapy. Also problematic access to essential and investigational medicines. And I think the situation is now increasingly challenged as what were multiple brain tumor histologies are now further subdivided among specific genomic subtypes and classes, which really requires another level of pathology and genomic expertise. The development of complementary diagnostics or companion diagnostics, and testing for biomarker-directed studies, the need for biopsies and perhaps even on therapy biopsies, the requirement for centralized data capture and management of data, data sharing, central pathology and imaging review, and obviously cultural and social barriers to care and the impact on research. So we actually heard from the experience in Africa of abandonment of therapy because of the fact that families cannot travel to specialized treatment centers, and more importantly, the absence of even essential chemotherapy agents in some parts of that continent. So there are obviously complementary efforts to advance global collaboration that I just want to mention briefly here. Accelerate platform, a multi-stakeholder platform based in Belgium, has an international collaboration working group addressing similar issues. The International Society of Pediatric Oncology has just launched its PARC program, a program for advancing research capacity for low-income and middle-income countries. This is linked to SIOP's role in the World Health Organization Global Initiative on Childhood Cancer to improve research to advance cure rates. So the goals here are really building capacity, creating or helping to create a research, a clinical trial infrastructure, addressing access issues, expanding enrollment on clinical trials, even required for approval and marketing authorization in all parts of the world of new cancer drugs for children. So it would appear to me that neuro-oncology, given the unmet need that exists in children with brain tumors, would be the perfect place to begin such an initiative. I believe this is the end of my formal presentation, and I look forward to some discussion and questions following. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Gregory, for your presentation and also for closing the loop to this AAADV Satellite Symposium on which Kim also reported back in session 2 yesterday. So I want to thank all speakers for their engagement, and I really appreciate the multi-stakeholder perspective we have been provided today by all the presentations. And to move us forward, I want to remind everybody on questions. Please put your questions into the Q&A section in Brella, and then we give you a short coffee break now for 10 minutes. As we wanted to start the panel discussion earlier, also to end earlier. And please, we want to address questions to Gregory first, as he has to leave earlier. Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience with this long session. So thank you for returning for our panel discussion. For your information, Peter Adamson may not be able to join us or join us rather late, just to make you aware. And as we announced already, we would love to start with the questions that are in the chat for Gregory and take it from there with the list. Thank you. So Gregory, there is a question about why are molecular targets selected as a criterion for the program and not other parameters such as high unmet needs or other?
Thanks, Claudia. Well, clearly, high unmet clinical need sort of spans the entirety of pediatric oncology, despite the fact that many children with cancer are cured. We know that new drugs are required because of the short and long-term toxicities associated with current therapies. But the legislation actually required this as a specific criteria. And I think to sort of keep up with the general changing paradigm of cancer drug development, which unlike cytotoxic therapies in the past, was really more focused on genetic drivers of specific cancers, and the fact that there were many targeted drugs approved in small populations of patients who were enriched for clinical trial purposes with biomarkers. So I think that is why, and clearly the high unmet need extends across the spectrum of pediatric cancers, because many of these targets, genetic abnormalities, mutations, actually are observed or associated with a variety of different pediatric cancers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gregory. And Actually, we will address the prioritization topic anyhow again later in the panel discussion, but we give focus to questions to you first. So there's a second one will a waiver still be possible for the targeted drugs on the list?
Yes, there are continuing opportunities for planned waiver requests. Number one, multiple same-in-class products, particularly when we see that clinical investigations of one or two of the products have resulted in only marginal evidence of efficacy. Like the PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors in pediatric cancer in general, except for specific rare situations. So that's one opportunity for waiver. And we currently have multiple same-in-class products in a variety of drug classes. And this is an issue that both we at the FDA and the EMA hope to address with sort of a consistent approach and response to sponsors about this. Other conditions that might justify a waiver would be if a product is not in a formulation that's appropriate for pediatric use. Another is whether there's evidence of specific developmental toxicity that might require a partial waiver based on a specific age group of children who we might not want to include in a clinical investigation. So there are opportunities and we address those on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, and also to keep the kind of limited patient population in mind in this context as well. Thank you. There's another question which we would like to address to Dominic and Gregory. So what is the best approach to get joint EMA-FDA advice on pediatric study design, pediatric development outside of a parallel FDA-EMA meeting? So thank you.
I'm not sure that I understand outside. I mean, if the question is specifically about the parallel scientific advice opportunity, I think as Dr. Karras explained, we have these monthly pediatric cluster calls, and sponsors can actually request that their product be included on the agenda of a cluster call, and sponsors can actually request that their product be the subject of a common commentary. And these common commentaries are not binding regulatory advice, but they do represent a coordinated approach to addressing high-level scientific issues in pediatric investigation plans and pediatric study plans, so that we can provide some sort of regulatory alignment to enable global product development for children. So there are definitely opportunities, and I think Dominic and I would both encourage sponsors to take advantage of these opportunities.
Also, the transparency in the context of the global pediatric development was addressed in the presentation. Background for the question may also be that the planning of a parallel scientific advice, the planning timelines is rather long, which may also sometimes hinder to use this procedure. But thank you very much for the hint on the cluster calls. And also, I remember at one of the Accelerate meetings some time ago, there was also a comment from industry that it would be great for industry to participate in this cluster calls. So it just reminds me on this question that has been asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and There's an interesting question from John Smythe to you, Heidrun. Is post-Brexit the UK still part of C4C?
Yes, they are. So I think for all the IMI projects which were funded and started at the time of the Brexit, there was no change. And after the end of the IMI funding period, we currently look into designing and setting up and implementing an independent legal entity, so a non-for-profit, and obviously that would then also serve the UK and the UK network if they're still interested to join. So yes, they are in.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah, we were quite nervous to see what comes out in the final papers, but it was okay.
That's great.
And we have an interesting question also in the context of the prioritization topic, that has been mentioned several times. So does prioritization in pediatric oncology drug development also mean we should prioritize in adult oncology drug development? Interesting one.
And I guess that's if I may, I mean, I think that's probably one of the most challenging parts, because I think of course any prioritization within the regulatory frameworks relates of course only to pediatric drug development, and how can we ensure that without having any negative halo effect on the adult development, if you wish. So that might not be an answer to the question, but rather sort of acknowledgement that exactly that I think is an issue, and maybe sort of turning that into a question to Heidrun and also Annette, with your experience through C4C and the multi-stakeholder discussions there in irritable bowel diseases, I think, where you had a forum, but also to Annette with regard to your programs in neurofibromatosis. How did you sort of experience prioritization, and what do you think is really needed to convince that there isn't a connection between a product being prioritized for a pediatric development without having any negative implications on the adult development in that regard? Yeah, that's a long question, probably.
No, I try my best, Dominic. Not sure I really have a good answer. I think as the C4C multi-stakeholder meeting is, as you said, the first one was bowel disease, the next one is atopic dermatitis. So clearly outside of oncology. And the initial idea for the bowel disease was really to clarify endpoints, pathways, possible, how such a program can design that all, and not really prioritization at that point. Because I think we also have to see that we have an additional hurdle maybe to prioritization if we look outside oncology in this type of indication. In oncology, as I understand, accelerate, there is always one class of drug with one mode of action discussed, getting on a target, and you look for the best drug addressing that target through that mode of action. For the example of bowel disease, we had completely different drugs with different mode of action. So there you have maybe a high number of compounds targeting that disease, but you have different pathways. So prioritization is even harder because you are not in one drug class. So the initial meeting for C4C at the moment was more led to look on is there common endpoints, can we define a common way, maybe more in the way it was EMA did with the PRH multi-stakeholder meeting some years ago, really looking for new endpoints also.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Heidrun. Annette, to turn it to you.
Yeah, so thanks first of all for the question. When it comes to prioritization of pediatric drugs, what I would prefer to see as a prioritization is those drugs that in the long run don't create new problems for the children that we're helping today, right? So that we're looking at long-term safe drugs, honestly, and especially in the condition where we are in a condition that's called neurofibromatosis, which is a chronic tumor condition where people really need to have safe drugs that they can take for a very long time without too annoying side effects. So I would advocate for drugs that don't create problems 10 years later, right? But for neurofibromatosis, we unfortunately didn't have to prioritize because our main task now still is to get pharmaceutical companies interested in neurofibromatosis and willing to work on these rare conditions. And talking to my colleagues from the pediatric oncology field, it feels that we all have that same challenge, right? We have small patient population, exactly what Peter Adamson this morning presented in his presentation. It's hard to get sexy to pharma because of the small patient populations.
Thank you, Annette. And if I may, Dominic, just to have another question for you, Annette. Can you share any insights in your, let's say, network, not the specific one, but across patient networks? Do you kind of exchange regularly? Are there topics that are flagged, for example, by your patients and parents in your network that you could address with other networks? And just for curiosity, thank you.
Yeah, so within the NF space, we have a pretty strong collaboration, especially in the US and Europe. We're still young, but in the US, we have a strong collaboration with both the NIH, CDMRP, but also we have a group of clinicians that work on clinical trial endpoints, where also the FDA, Greg was also at our NF conference a couple of years ago. So I think it is a very collaborative community of other funders, as you saw on my slide, and also of the clinicians that are very highly collaborative. And I always say in a rare disease space, such as either pediatric oncology or a disease like neurofibromatosis, we don't have the luxury to compete, right? We're too few. We really need to. Collaboration is just not possible to do it in another way.
Thank you very much. Actually, there's one question to Peter Adamson that unfortunately we will not be able to address now. And there is one more when in the development of a drug should pediatric associations get involved?
So from my perspective, it depends a little bit what the role of the pediatric association is. I mean, as we see, there is different types of foundations. There are foundations that are very strong in their investment in academic research, and they will kind of fuel the discoveries that then later on will lead to better treatments for patients. You have the pediatric associations that are more investors, venture philanthropy, who are coming in later when the assets are really in a later stage and kind of push them from the early phase 1 all the way into commercial. What we have chosen at the Children's Tumor Foundation is, in fact, we walk along with the researchers. So we will invest in research, but then our main role is that we have, in fact, developed with a team of former drug developers what we call an R&D enabling platform, where we really help and guide the pharma industry partners to figure out which drug to select and how we can help, in fact, on the path to either patient selection, endpoint development, preclinical testing. So we have really developed a platform, which means that we are getting in from day one. In fact, when it comes to the drug, we really help. And some companies that are like, we would like to get into NF, we even help them write their target product profile. So it's really following the whole parcours, but it depends a little bit from patient association to patient association.
Thank you very much. Actually, there's one more question we are going to address, but definitely I also wanted to address later on the delays in clinical trials, and maybe we could have a multi-stakeholder perspective on this one as well. So there's another question, which is it possible to present several trial designs to EMA in order for the agency help us select the optimal options? Sorry.
That's a good question. I mean, if it's about getting scientific advice on certain innovative trial designs, then yes, that's surely a possibility through the formal scientific advice procedure. If it's as part of discussions within the pediatric investigation plan to help identifying how to best move a product forward towards the target population where the unmet need is considered to be highest, that then similar and potentially even different products, that then the answer is also yes. That's also possible as part of discussions with the pediatric committee, the PDCO at the EMA, where we of course equally collaborate with other respective working parties and committees in that regard. So the answer is yes.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Actually, Gregory, I would have another question for you. So we read something about RACE 2.0 some time ago, and I would be grateful if you could reflect a little bit on this aspect. Thank you.
Sure. Actually, I'm not supposed to comment or discuss pending legislation, but I can tell you a bit that RACE 2.0 was really looking sort of at the next step, whereas the current Race for Children Act requires early investigation of a specific agent, and RACE 2.0 was envisioned as a way to really continue to accelerate not only drug development, but therapy development for childhood cancers by requiring combinations of drugs to be studied in the pediatric population and in specific disease areas. So there's been some discussion within specific congressional committees regarding this with the drafter of the legislation, and nothing has been formally introduced as a bill as yet to Congress. So it's still a work in progress, if you will, with among a number of advocates and providing technical advice to congressional staffers as they review different iterations of the bill. But that's as much as I know about it at this point in time.
I'm very grateful for your comment. Thank you so much.
Sure.
There's one more question. Is it conceivable to ever have one master protocol involving all age ranges in diseases that affect all age ranges?
I think the answer is yes.
Yes, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, we would certainly hope that master protocols could include both pediatric patients as well as adult patients, particularly in the setting of targeted agents and in the setting of tissue or histology agnostic development programs, where we know that the target is responsible for driving different types of cancers across the age spectrum, and if I think a single master protocol that is reviewed by the agency, is reviewed by institutional review boards, rather than reinventing the wheel, if you will, I think could save a great deal of time and let us actually really accelerate. I mean, we talk a lot about accelerate, and I think this would be one opportunity to really put that to action.
And I think we have. I mean, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have. Through Accelerate discussions, the Glow BNHL platform in mature B-cell malignancies has been initiated. There is PEDAL or UPAL in pediatric relapsed refractory AML, another platform which has been sort of evolved out of Accelerate discussions, where indeed there is the objective to sort of put prioritized products into these platforms, with equally allowing then pharmaceutical companies to use this platform to fulfill their regulatory requirements.
Right.
So there are discussions ongoing, and I think the answer is yes, as Greg mentioned. Yeah.
And maybe
Annette,
we're literally doing that now. So within the IMI, we're participating in a project called EU Pearl, and for neurofibromatosis, that is exactly the problem we're dealing with, right? You have multiple manifestations that will evolve over multiple ranges, and it's hard to develop one master protocol because there are certain pediatric requirements that will apply to the younger population that may not apply to the adult population. So I think it is tricky, and it's harder than just say you only fix on pediatric or you only focus on adult. But on the other hand, doing this exercise now where we really focus on the progressive nature of this disorder, well, optic pathway gliomas are in the pediatric population, whereas this plexiform neurofibromas are in the olders. It's a very interesting exercise, and we will be talking to C4C very soon as well. So it's an interesting exercise, but it's hard, but it's doable. We're doing it now.
Yes.
And I would just add that the platform studies that Dominic mentioned, the PEDAL study, sponsored by the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, was really an outgrowth of the BEAT AML program that was started in adults. Again, it's in specific genomic subsets of acute myelogenous leukemia, which span the adult and the pediatric population. So I agree with Annette that it's difficult, but personally, I think it's easier to deal with those difficulties earlier rather than waiting and then sequentially starting from scratch to develop a whole new master protocol. So I think there are challenges, but I think there are challenges that we really need to look at developing some innovative ways to overcome.
And I hear a discussion with the EMA and the FDA early in the development of these master protocols.
Exactly.
Even not with drug-specific entries already, but just as the master protocol, I think would be hugely important to make sure that we don't misguide or mislead the pharmaceutical companies with their drugs, right? So I think, it's exciting, but it's working.
Yeah,
Yep, I agree.
and I think that's really key indeed. And I think, we're always calling for innovation and asking for innovation. And yes, innovation always poses challenges, but let's work together to overcome them, and let's acknowledge also that means that everyone has to give a bit, if you wish. So I think we're certainly very, very keen to sort of get these applications, discuss them, and sort of move them forward.
Yeah, I think if I understand IMI Pearl correctly, they at least have, as usual for IMI projects, they have a link to EMA also, and I don't know how much involvement is there, but certainly to vet the draft platform protocols.
Yeah. So just to clarify, yes, we do have the regulators in the team, which is of course super helpful. But the interesting thing is it has taken us quite a while of discussion between the clinicians to get on the same page. because this is a hard topic, but I think we're almost ready to come ask for some advice to the regulators and understand whether we're doing this right or whether we're completely wrong, right? So yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. So I just want to take the opportunity to remind us on two very prominent keywords that we had in the poll when we asked about the most significant hurdles, but also the most valuable measures taken to foster pediatric development, right, in oncology. So with regard to the hurdles, it was for sure recruitment, small populations, etc., and that goes very well along with the analysis of challenges as you presented it, Heidrun, also on delays in clinical trials, which is often the cause for PIP modifications in Europe, right? So how to best address this aspect?
If I would have the crystal ball, but no, honestly, I think I cannot. I'm not so deeply in oncology, but I think what we have seen also in preparation of C4C, we have some sometimes astonishing but very specific hurdles for pediatric, and it starts with a buzzword, and this time not looking at the numbers, but really with the feasibility assessment and also with the training and the preparedness of sites to really put it at that point. We see in industry benchmarks that we have for pediatric studies, and that was surprising to me, that also includes oncology studies, because I thought because of the higher medical need, it might be easier there. We see that roughly 40% of sites we have in a study will never recruit a patient. So something is not really working. There is an over-promising or an underestimation of the challenges for the study. At least these sites never see a patient. So I think we have really to improve the way how we recruit, how we select sites which recruit, and how we do this more appropriately, because that is a huge loss for all involved, also for the healthcare institutions which get ready and never see somebody. And the other point is that we lose quite a lot of patients over the time of a study. And a third hurdle, which is a little bit regional, where I think we have higher hurdles in, for example, Germany and some other countries than, for example, in the Nordic countries, is the awareness. And that might not be true for oncology. That is maybe something more for outside the oncology space. That is the willingness, the awareness, and the willingness of parents to put their children in a clinical study. So directly for oncology, I cannot say. As I said, I was only surprised that also we have a very high number of non-recruiting sites in the oncology space. And we have delays in study startup that takes usually 6 to 8 months longer than for any adult study in the same case. Multiple factors, from protocol writing to ethic discussions with ethic committees. So that is multifactorial. But I think that is the other thing where we maybe also with networks and better prepared protocols with the help of patient input could maybe get better.
Thank you, Heidrun. And that we have no more questions in the chat, but Dominic, I remember when we had a chat for preparation for the panel discussion, there was also this aspect on how to foster more this pre-competitive data sharing that also Annette referred to.
Maybe Claudia, I wanted to add one quick thing. I think what we have done in the NF space, or what people have done in the NF space, is I think works really well, is first create a network of clinics that are really well connected and have some kind of agreement on how they collect their data. The next is to build, based on within that network, build longitudinal natural history studies so that you actually follow your patients over time, but that your patients are with you. And then you offer platform trials so that people can actually be offered the treatment when they need it. And we have seen and that's, for example, one of the big exercises within EU Pearl is really to build that entire platform out. And that I feel really has worked, because then your patient recruitment is suddenly reduced to 0 because those are the patients that you are following. So you offer them treatment as they need treatment.
Thank you very much. Dominic, may I hand this pre-competitive data sharing aspect to you? That I would be grateful for that.
Yes,
thank you.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Claudia. First, let me welcome Peter, who just joined the discussion. Hi, really great to have you with us. We are in the middle of discussions, and we still have one question for you. So bear with us. I just wanted to come to that point of pre-competitive data sharing, something everyone always talks about, but then it gets very difficult actually to implement. And there, when listening to your presentation, I was really struck by your data sharing portal, which you set up, where you also, I think, mentioned that it was challenging, and you had to push people. And I'm just wondering if you could expand a bit more, on how you made this happen, and what's really needed to make this the norm and to sort of have this more commonly available, because I think that's still what we're missing. Everyone talks about it, but actually no one really feels wanting to share data.
So it shortened my life by 5 years, because I can tell you that in the beginning, when we asked people to share their data, it really felt like we asked them if they could share their toothbrush, right? So, and it was really hard in the beginning. What we did is we set up a big collaborative consortium, which is called Synodos, which are really groups of people from all over the world that collaborate on a big problem that no one lab can solve by themselves. And there, by contract, people were forced, in fact, between us here, to share their data at that time. And then little by little, it was starting to become a norm. And also the other funders, NTAP, which is another big NF funder, the CMRP is now incentivizing their participants to share their data. Some NIH collaborators are sharing their data in the data portal. And in fact, what came out of that is we started to launch hackathons. And then the hackathon was really a fun moment to share data and see if we can learn something new on NF that nobody has ever discovered so far. And that has really also helped people to then say, oh, to be part of this cool thing, I want to share my data too. So I think it's really creating a movement. And now we even have teams from American Airlines that are participating and looking at biological data. So it's a movement, but it's hard to start, but once you feel, and there is still some resistance, right? Still some groups like, this is a lot of work, we don't see the value, blah, blah, blah. So, but it becomes almost like the norm going forward. Will we be able to keep it? Can't promise, but we try. We're putting a lot of money in it.
Thanks. Maybe
the other example, and I don't know, some of you may know, I think INC, the International Neonatal Consortium, together with Critical Path, has just started a data sharing platform for the critical paths for rare diseases. And within the INC, we have hooked up to that data sharing platform and currently asked industry, academia, networks to share data from neonates with the aim to hopefully define better normal ranges for lab values. And it was quite surprisingly that through very good processes and contracts and data sharing agreements in place, they were also able to really attract also industry to share their data and to share data from respective studies in that population. So it is possible. It is even possible to share data out of Europe in such an US platform. But I think we will have to do quite a lot more in Europe to come to this type of agreements.
Thank you. Maybe we could take the opportunity to welcome Peter and let him address the question that is directed to your presentation. Peter, would you be happy to take that?
Yeah, Claudia, yes, thank you. And it's great to be here. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. And so I think what I was trying to say, and obviously didn't say it clearly, is that the designing a phase 3 trial is not a good investment of anyone's time for two reasons. One, we're designing it before we've generated any clinical pediatric data for the most part. And two, in most of our diseases, we can conduct globally 1 or perhaps 2 phase 3 trials in any disease category. And so we can create these designs, but the reality would be, one, there has to be data of efficacy, and ultimately then a decision by the community, what are our options? If we can only ask one question, which question will it be? So what I was trying to say is, I'm sorry for the background noise, I found that spending time discussing details are probably not of value. The idea that a phase 3 trial might be required is clear, but it is in the distant future. And so getting beyond that, there may need to be a phase 3 trial, I don't think is generally productive.
Thank you very much. I hope that clarified this aspect. Peter, if you would like to raise any other topic, feel free. What I wanted to address in the context of your presentation, and also the data you presented on the delay between first in human and first in pediatrics trials, right? Which seems to be still very obvious, and I think you referred to data reflected already some years ago. So any thoughts in this context from you?
Yeah, I think it underscores a challenge that that our regulations and incentives have addressed some of the problems, but ultimately they haven't addressed the timeliness problem. I also think it's clear that not all drugs are created equally, that we have to prioritize which drugs, by we, I mean the pediatric community, which drugs do we want to move quickly on, and which drugs are important, but perhaps don't rise to that level. So we need it all comes down to prioritization. We're not going to accelerate every drug that's in the pipeline and shorten that timeline, but we should be able to decide which subgroup of drugs. We don't want to wait a median of 6.5 years. We want to start a lot earlier.
Thank you.
Can I, Claudia? Sorry. Can I take that a bit further, Peter? How do we do that? And we touched upon that already previously. But how do we prioritize or deprioritize? Without creating a negative halo effect over to the adults. I've seen PIP discussions where it came very clearly across. We don't want our product to be deprioritized because we're worried.
Yeah, well, now being in industry, I think the message I would take is we're dealing with ultra rare pediatric diseases, and we're being paranoid if it's being deprioritized for an ultra rare pediatric indication. But I'm not on the commercial side. I'm on the development side. I think putting aside the politics, it is a challenging issue that, okay, what data are we going to compare? And in general, you'd like to be comparing phase 2 data to make some decisions, and that's already late in the game. And but it has to be data driven. And I personally, where we sometimes get bogged down is if something is first in class, that may carry higher priority if something is fourth in class, right? Do we need a fourth this or a fourth that? So it is a challenging problem, Dominic. I can't pretend I know the answer, but I do think it has to be a multi-stakeholder prioritization that's data-driven and not based on paranoia from one or more companies.
Yeah.
I don't know, Greg, I mean, I think you're on there as well. You've probably dealt with this from the FDA side, but I view it as a global challenge.
I absolutely agree. It's a global challenge, and I was going to bring the whole issue of prioritization up earlier when there was the discussion about difficulties with recruitment. Some of that difficulty results from a number of competing studies, and competing studies or studies that compete for no good reason. So clearly, multiple same-in-class drugs, drugs where there's limited evidence of activity. We can't study those. We just don't have the resources. We don't have the patient numbers, and one could actually question the ethical principles behind studying drugs in those situations. So prioritization is critical. And it's clearly needs multi-stakeholder input. So, agreed.
Thank you very much, Gregory. And unfortunately, Gregory has to leave the panel discussion. So just for you all.
I apologize. I have to leave for another meeting.
Thanks a lot, Greg, for your.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have one outstanding question here, which I hope we will be able to address. If a IPSP exists and PIP not yet started, how high is the likelihood that PETCO accept the agreed US IPSP as basis for the EU PIP without major changes?
That's yeah. I mean, the PDCO will review and discuss the submitted PIP on its own merit and independently, and will come to a conclusion. I think that the message is, be transparent about your respective plans. If you want to sort of be from a process perspective, I would probably, recommend you submit simultaneously. As we discussed earlier, you request a discussion at the cluster call. I think there's a much higher likelihood, I think, coming forward and coming out of it with an aligned development program here, which doesn't require you needing to come forward with, changes either on the IPSP or the PIP side, respectively. I think, we talk to each other and make use of that.
Thank you very much. And there is no additional question in the Q&A section yet. So I think we made quite some progress on our discussion, and we had a good and long panel discussion. So thank you all for weighing into that. Thank you, Peter, for joining. And with that, I want to thank all participants for their interest in our session. I want to thank you all on the panel for your engagement, and with that, we would like to close our session today. However, I want to flag that we will have another session tomorrow afternoon, European time, which will address the collaboration in post-COVID regulatory environment, and we will have exciting presentations there as well. So we hope to see you there tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget to share your feedback with us via the survey.
All right, the survey. Sorry, so, Dominic. Thank you for reminding me. So there is a survey. Yeah, there is a survey
Bye-bye
on the umbrella, and please take it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.